All right, well, let's get started. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mark Dolan. I'm one of the instructors for today. You're not going to see me very much, so I'll just say hi right now. I'm going to be doing the slides, so I'll be in the background. Our other instructors today are Ray Rothrock. Ray, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. Ray Rothrock here.
And Chip Swan.
Hello, folks.
Great. Okay, so our webinar today is hosted by WPV-CERT, and that is a program of the Woodside Fire District. We cover the areas of the towns of Woodside, Portola Valley, and the areas of Emerald Hills, Ladera, Los Trancos, Skyline, and Vista Verde areas. This is a Zoom webinar, so it's a little different in that you're only going to see the presenters. Please use the Q&A section to type any questions that you have, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. We are going to stop along the way several times to ask questions. When we do stop, if you want to ask your question verbally, then you can click the raise your hand option, and then we can unmute you so you can ask your question. We are recording this webinar, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel in a few days after today. And we'll also be posting the slide deck and additional support materials. So we have 2 hours, and we do have a lot to cover, but we've broken it into 2 modules, roughly about 1 hour each. And then we'll take a brief 5-minute break between the modules. I know that we have several people attending this session from CERT programs outside of our area, and so we thank you for joining us and welcome. The first module will be applicable to anybody interested in two-way radio communications, and then the second module is going to be specific to our WPV-CERT program and goes in depth on the radio systems we use here within our program. Okay, so let's get started. So imagine yourself without your smartphone, internet access, and email. We use these and are so reliant upon them. But the truth of the matter is we can't rely upon them to be available after a disaster. History has actually shown that these core communication systems are vulnerable and not reliable in major disasters. It may take days, weeks, or even months to restore critical infrastructure after a major disaster. And for us here in the Woodside Fire District, we know very well that because a lot of our areas are somewhat rural, low density, that it's not going to be a high priority for the carriers to restore infrastructure. Cell companies do have what they call cell on wheels or cell on light trucks, and these are portable cellular towers that can be brought into disaster areas to bring up communication systems. But those are going to end up in the higher population densities, and they do take several days to get delivered and set up. So they're not just going to magically be there immediately after a major earthquake, for example. And specifically in our area, we have a lot of people that use Comcast cable for their internet service. And the cable system uses equipment located throughout the neighborhoods that require power. And some of this equipment has battery backups, but a lot of it does not. And when those batteries fail, then the whole system goes down. And we actually experienced this at the last public safety power shutoff, where several neighborhoods lost all internet service through Comcast for several days when that happened. So if there is a disaster and communication systems are disrupted, well, what's a couple little best practices? You know, if your landline or your cell phone works, great, but expect them to be busy. Best suggestion is to use text messaging. It uses less bandwidth and it's a store and forward system. So use text messaging to lower the burden on the infrastructure. Keep non-essential calls to a minimum. Avoid that urge to call up mom or grandpa or whatever to check on them. It's better to send a text message. That way you're freeing up the resources for critical calls. And of course, always keep an AM/FM radio handy. Of course, most cars have AM/FM radios, so you can always go out to your car, but it's always a good idea to have a portable one, battery powered, that's easy to use. Here in Portola Valley, we do have an AM radio station, AM 1680, which is operational 24/7 and provides critical messaging that'll be posted on that channel. So we're going to talk a lot about radios today, but it's important to realize that a radio is one of your tools. And as with most tools, they require skill to use them well. But another very important thing to remember about radios is that we need to always focus our efforts on solving problems and less effort on communicating those problems to somebody else. So although radios are an incredibly important tool, it's not good to consider the radio a way of passing off your problems to someone else to solve for you. All right, so let's talk about some rules before we get started. So here in the United States, the Federal Communications Commission, that's the FCC, regulates all the aspects of radio transmissions. That includes who can use a particular radio service and for what uses or purpose, the frequencies and transmission modes that can be used, and technical specifications of the equipment. Now, it's important to point out that illegal use of radio services can be fined up to $10,000 a day. So if, for example, you think it's a great idea to program your radio to a police or fire frequency and start chatting with them, just be aware that that's an extremely serious crime, and that you could even be criminally charged in those type of cases. So always know what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do, and never interfere with other people's communications. We're going to talk about several of the different types of radio services that are commonly used for two-way radio communications. We're going to go in depth on several of these, but here's just a general summary. We have our family radio service, general mobile radio service, and multi-use radio service, which we'll talk about now in detail. And then Ray Rothrock will give us an overview of amateur radio. And then I also listed on here, just for your knowledge, that there's two common frequency pools. One is the public safety pool, and that's where all the police, fire, emergency medical services radios operate. And then the business and industrial pool, which is where commercial entities would get radio licenses. Things like construction companies and stadiums and your McDonald's, all of those people get their frequencies in the business industrial pool. So let's start with FRS, or family radio service. These are commonly called bubble pack radios. These are the things that you can find in regular stores like Target and REI, Walmart, etc. These are walkie-talkie style radios that are meant for short distance personal communications, family communications, and they operate in the UHF band in the 462 and 467 megahertz range. There's 22 different channels available for use. And they also have sub-channels, which are also known as CTCSS or PL tones. That just means that the radio will mute the speaker until it receives a radio signal from a transmitting radio that has the same tone set on it. So it's not any form of encryption or privacy, other than it just lets you ignore transmissions from people that you might not want to listen to. It's also really important to realize that all the radio services that we're talking about here do not allow encryption. And every time that you're transmitting a radio signal from your radio, you need to assume that somebody can listen to it. It's very easy for people with scanners or amateur radio operators or people with the knowledge to listen to all these frequencies. So never talk about private matters over the radio. Just assume somebody's listening. So there's no license required for these radios, and they do have a fairly short range, half a mile to a mile. Can be less, can be more, but these are meant for very short range communications. The next radio service we'll talk about is GMRS, or General Mobile Radio Service. Again, this is a general purpose FM two-way radio service meant for local short distance communications. But there's a big difference in that a GMRS licensee can use a combination of different types of radio equipment. The FRS service we just talked about, you're limited to these small handheld radios with fixed antennas, whereas in the GMRS service, you can actually use both handheld radios, mobile radios, base station or fixed radios, and also repeater systems. So we have a lot more flexibility with this service. This also has 22 channels, and some of the radios do support repeaters, which we'll talk about in detail. And this service is allowed significantly higher wattage. So in the FRS world, the maximum power is 2 watts. In the GMRS licensing, the maximum power for base station and mobile equipment is 50 watts. So again, significantly more capabilities within the GMRS service. You do need a license for this, but there is no test involved. All you do to get the license is submit an application, you send in payment for $70, and you get a 10-year license, and that license is good for you and your immediate family. So that includes grandma and grandpa, kids, everybody in the immediate family. Back in before 2017, you could actually purchase combination radios. So these were bubble pack radios that would be both FRS and GMRS. The irony of this was that somewhere deep in the manual, it would say on the last page, oh, by the way, if you want to use these specific channel numbers, then you need to get a GMRS license. So many people didn't do that, and the FCC kind of got involved and decided that manufacturers could no longer sell combination radios. And then they grandfathered in any radio produced prior to September 2017 that did operate on the GMRS frequencies at 2 watts or less, and said you don't need a license to use those radios. But you do need a license if you're going to use them on repeater frequencies. So nowadays, essentially, if you get a bubble pack radio at Target or REI or wherever, it's most likely an FRS radio. It doesn't have the GMRS capabilities. But manufacturers now have been selling GMRS radios that have higher wattage, better overall capability, repeater capability. And so it's been relatively good for the market because there's now kind of a new market for GMRS only radios. Okay, and the last service we're going to talk about right now is MURS, or multi-use radio. Again, this is a service for short distance communications, but it is in the VHF band, very high frequency. There are some benefits to that for when you're doing outside communications. It has a little bit better propagation than UHF, but it is only 5 channels. However, you are allowed to use external antennas, which can be very beneficial if you use specific types of antenna to focus your signal in the directions you want it to go. You can get greater range. There is a limitation that the MURS transmitter, the radio itself, has to be specifically certified to be a MURS radio, and it can only be a MURS radio. But the benefit is there's no license required. Okay, so a lot of what I've been talking about is, or what a lot of people assume with two-way radios, is a handheld radio or a portable radio. also known as a walkie-talkie or an HT, which can stand for handy talkie or handheld transceiver. And these are obviously very convenient because they're portable. They're all self-contained. They usually have a battery to power them. They have an integrated antenna. Because of this, they kind of have limited power capabilities, typically 10 watts or less. Most are in the 4 to 5 watt area. There are other radios called mobile or base station radios that are commonly installed in a car or used in a fixed location. These often require an external power source like the car itself or a power supply, and they use an external antenna. So in a car, it would be a car top antenna, or if it was in a home, it would be an antenna you'd put on your roof. The benefit to these radios is that they do have much higher power. Most of them are 30 plus watts, some are 50, some are 100 watts. Because the antenna is on top of your car or up on top of your house, you can now have 100 watts of power coming out of this. You wouldn't want to do that if it was 2 inches from your head, like in a handheld radio. So these are the radios commonly installed in police cars, fire engines, anybody that's going to be on the radio a lot, they're going to have a radio like this in their car or in as a base station. All right, a common question with radios is always, well, how far do they work? What's the range? Well, these radios operate in the VHF or UHF spectrum, and these are line of sight frequencies, meaning that obstructions like hills or mountains or large buildings will block or attenuate the signal. When a radio communicates to other radios directly without the use of a repeater system, we call that simplex communications, or just radio to radio communications. And the effective range for simplex communications, lots of variables here, but it's usually less than people assume it to be. And so I listed half a mile to 3 miles here. This is very dependent on many factors. However, the key factor for range on line of sight radios is antenna height and the position of the radio. So if you're having difficulty communicating, try relocating yourself or getting as high as you can get. Obviously, if somebody's at the top of a mountain and they're talking to somebody down in a valley, well, then you have line of sight. And so in those type of scenarios, you can have really great range. You could be talking to somebody 10 miles away or 15 miles away. But if you both are down in the valley, holding a handheld radio that's maybe 6 feet off the ground, well, then your effective range might only be 2 miles or 2.5 miles. So again, height of the antenna or height of the transmitting and receiving antenna is a huge part of how far you're going to be able to talk. And then there's something kind of cool that amateur radio operators get to do. And of course, some people say, well, wait a second, amateur radio operators can talk to people with their radios all around the world. How does that work? Well, radio signals below about 30 megahertz actually can bounce off the ionosphere, causing them to be reflected back down to Earth. And that allows us to have very long range communications capabilities. But those only work at significantly lower frequencies than what these radios work at. And there's a lot of factors involved. It's more art than science in some respects, because it has a lot to do with the weather and sunspots and all sorts of things. So we'll talk more about amateur radio if that's something that you want to consider learning about. It's a really cool hobby. Okay, so repeaters. Well, if all we could do would be to talk radio to radio, it would be a real challenge, especially in places here like Portola Valley and Woodside, where we have lots and lots of rolling hills and valleys and whatnot. It would be really hard to keep communications, especially for critical things like police and fire. So the way we solve this problem is through the use of repeaters. And a repeater is just equipment that is listening and transmitting at the same time. And we put it at a central location, preferably as high up as we can in a central location, so that we have line of sight to any of the users of the system. And by doing this, we can now talk from one radio on one side of a mountain to a radio on the other side of the mountain, because those radios are communicating through the repeater system. So repeaters can significantly extend the effective range. You'll notice if you look up at the ridge lines here in the Bay Area, you'll see a fairly large number of antenna towers. Well, that's exactly what all these towers are. They're radio repeaters for all the different folks out there that need them: the police, the fire, private industry, as well as all sorts of other radio users. But that's what all those things up there up on the hills are. Okay, so let's talk about using a radio. Handheld radios are usually powered with a battery pack that's attached to the radio. And many of these are rechargeable. And that's great if you use the radio often, but it's not great if you're going to use put the radio in long-term storage, or when you don't have an easy way to recharge the battery pack after you use it. So for CERT members specifically, we recommend, because you're probably going to put this radio in your backpack and leave it there for an extended period of time, we recommend having an AA battery pack available for your radio. And we highly recommend the Energizer Ultimate Lithium batteries, because these are lithium batteries that have an extremely long storage life and they don't leak. So you can actually leave it in the pack. This way you can simply, when you run out of battery, you can just put in some new batteries, and you don't need to worry about coming up with a power source or some way to power your radio. So I'm just going to quickly demonstrate here on this specific radio how the battery pack connects. This is a typical handheld radio. This is the radio that we use here in our program. This is a rechargeable lithium battery pack, and it can be charged in a desktop charger like this little guy here. And it just charges. You plug this into the wall, and you can drop the battery pack in there, and it'll charge. It takes several hours to charge. You can also have it attached to the radio and put the whole thing in there like that. So again, this is great if you're using the radio frequently. You know, if you're using this in your job or business, you drop that in there every night. Every morning you come and you grab the radio. But again, if this is going to sit in a backpack for 6 months, then these rechargeables are not as useful. So that's when we have the AA pack. You just stick your batteries in there, snap the cover on, and then this attaches to the radio just like the other one. So this is a great way to make sure you always have power available. There's also what are commonly called battery eliminators, like this thing, which plugs into a 12-volt lighter socket in a car or some other 12-volt power source. And then this attaches to the radio. And now, as long as you've got your 12-volt power, you've got power to your radio. So very important to always have power to your radio, especially for emergency situations where you don't really know how long you're going to be away from a power source. So be sure to keep that AA battery pack available. Okay, so let's talk about the next most important thing on your radio, and that's how to turn it on and off. Well, most of these radios have an on-off and volume knob. It's usually at the top of the radio for portable radios. Some have separate on-off buttons, but most of them use the on-off and volume control. So you just click it into the on position and then increase the volume using the knob. Another really important thing you need to know on any radio is how to set the channel. And most of the radios have a channel selection knob at the top of the radio. Sometimes it's a channel up-down button or a channel select button, and you just keep pushing that until you're on the channel that you want. Some radios also have the ability to set the channel using the front panel. So radios that have a keypad on them, you can usually dial in the actual channel number. So for example, here are a couple different radios. You'll see that this radio here, it has a channel select knob up at the top that you can spin around. It also has the ability to type in the channels through the keypad here. This radio, it doesn't have a display or a keypad. It only has the channel select knob up here. So in this case, you need to know which channel number you need to be on. And those channel frequencies are already programmed into the radio and can't be changed. And then on this radio, same thing, this has a display on here. So as you spin the knob up at the top, you can see that it changes the channels. And then I can also type in a channel number if I need to. So if I want to go to channel 005, I can type that in, it takes me right to channel 5. So that's the channel selection knob. Okay, and finally, the most important thing that you need to know on your radio is the push to talk button. This is the button that you push and hold down when you want to transmit or send a message. It's usually on the left-hand side of handheld radios so that you can easily grab it with your finger as you're holding the radio. And it's important to remember that when you talk on the radio, you actually need to push this button down just a little bit before you start talking, half a second, second. It takes a little bit of time for the radio to turn on and start transmitting. And if you're too quick to talk after you push that button, then the first part of your transmission is going to get cut off. So you can also think of it as the push then talk button. Okay, I know that was a lot to talk about. I'm going to stop here and ask if there's any specific questions on what we've covered so far that we can answer before we move on to how to use the radio and best practices for using the radio. I think we've got a couple hands here. So Sue, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can talk. And Vicky, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and talk as well.
Okay.
Go ahead, Vicky.
So do you just want to clarify what kind of radio the CERT radio is that we've purchased?
Yes, the CERT radio is a GMRS radio, or at least that's the frequencies we're using. In the next module, we'll talk more about specifically our radio.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so not seeing any questions, we'll go ahead and move on, and I will pass it over to Ray.
Okay. Did Sue get her question in?
She's able to talk. Sue, if you unmute yourself, you can talk.
Yeah, and Sue, that's down at the lower left of your screen. You should be able to click on the little microphone thing. There you go.
If I'm the Sue you mean, I didn't have a question, and I didn't think I raised my hand, so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thanks, Sue. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ray Rothrock. Now that Mark has taken us through a lot about the equipment, how to turn it on, how to find a channel, how to push then talk, very critical. I'm going to just cover in a few slides, sort of just basic protocol when you do push the push to talk button, how you communicate. So you have this radio, you're out there somewhere, and typically people have tactical call signs. And tactical call signs are often representative of who you are, where you are, or what you are. Not necessarily I'm Ray or I'm Bill or I'm Chip or whatever, but if I'm playing a role in an emergency, that's typically what my call sign will be. For example, if I'm on a team and we're out doing some search and rescue or just investigation, we might be Team 1. Likewise, Woodside will have their command center set up and their Woodside command, so that if I'm out in the field and I call them, I can say, hey, Woodside command, this is Team 1. So everybody knows their role as well as what their responsibilities are. And likewise, in Portola Valley, we have the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, Medical Ops, Engine 7. So tactical call signs are a very cool way and a short way to know what your function is, probably where your location is, and the uniqueness of your role here. Next. Okay. So when you use the radio, you know, a few things always happen. And believe me, even after all the years that I've been messing around with radio, I make mistakes all the time. And the number one mistake is being on the wrong channel, being in a hurry, picking up the radio and just pushing the button and start talking and realizing I'm not on the right channel or a channel that I want to communicate on. So you all should, you know, turn it on, make sure it's set like you want. It's always good to listen before you venture out talking. So listen a little bit. And then you can go. Remember, these are radios. These are not telephones. In telephones, two people can talk at the same time. That's called duplex in radio speak. But on a radio, only one person can talk at a time, and that's called simplex or talk around. These are sort of technical terms you might hear from time to time, but only one person can talk at a time. And I'm just go to the last bullet and come back. I cannot overemphasize. Mark said it, and we'll say it several times today. Push the button and then talk. Even though electronics is, you know, pretty near the speed of light, there's still slight delays as all the switches and everything get kicked in. So talk after you push the button. Look, we should just use regular language. We know each other. We know our town. We know the streets. We know what a fire is. No 10 codes or jargon. We all don't know all the jargon. We all don't know all the 10 codes. And 10 codes are very popular in the CB world, and in the amateur world, there's about a Q codes, but we should just use plain language. Very important. And when you speak, you should speak in a normal tone. In an emergency, sometimes people do get excited. Sometimes they get a little out of breath. Sometimes they get a little bit long-winded. So keep your messages short and to the point. We've got some demonstrations coming up here in a minute, but basically just a piece of information at a time. Who are you? What are you doing? What do you need? And then wait for a response. As Mark said, your performance on that radio, or the radio's performance, will be best if you hold the radio up and vertically and in a good location. If you can't quite hear a repeater or having a hard time, you know, find a higher ground. That's the quickest way to have better radio performance. And I'll say it again, please push the button first before you say something. Otherwise, the front end of your message might be cut off. And so if I'm saying, hey, this is team one, come in Woodside, well, everybody may just hear Woodside. They don't know what to do. So it's just really important to take your time, take a breath, and then talk after you push the button. Okay? So when you call another station, you know, think about what you're going to say before you say it. That helps a lot in keeping it, as I said, short and sweet and to the point. It avoids run-on sentences and sort of meandering in the conversation. So if I'm just trying to establish a communication with another station, it's very simple. Command post, this is team one. You know, Portola Valley EOC, this is team one. And then wait for the response. Let go of the button and listen. And if people are there, they'll say, team one, go ahead. So there's a nice little round trip there. It helps you sort of tune better. If you're not in a great location, you can relocate to continue the conversation. But short, sweet, confirming burst of communication. Next. So, and then you'll communicate, you know, the injury, the fire, just the things are okay. That's something that is sometimes important to communicate. But when you acknowledge that person, okay, team one, we copied everything you said. That's a pretty popular term. Or just plain old thank you. Or I acknowledge what you said. I've written it down. And then thank you very much and go to the next communication. So it's just like having a conversation with anybody, except that you can't talk over each other and you should keep it in short sentences so that a lot of information can go back and forth with high fidelity. Okay? So radio protocol is just like us talking, except only one at a time. Wait before you talk, wait after you push the button, and just acknowledge what you've heard. Those are kind of the summaries. Any questions out there? All right. Well, you know, Mark, I didn't have any questions, so.
Looks like we do have a question from our Lena.
Okay.
can unmute yourself, Elena.
Hi, I was just wondering if when you key the radio, does everybody hear that?
Yes, remember what Mark said, when you're transmitting, anybody on that frequency can hear what you're saying. So if you hear something that's not directed at you, you shouldn't respond unless it's a call for help or something, of course. But yes, no, assume whatever you say, everybody hears.
Right. So if you key the radio, people will know that you're trying to reach somebody,
Yeah.
and then if they can't hear you, they'll let you know that they can't hear you.
Well, they don't know if they can't hear you, they didn't know you tried.
Right.
So,
However, you can, just by pressing that button, you can interfere with other people who are trying to communicate at the same time. And some people actually develop a bad habit of hitting that button, and you hear this chunk, chunk, chunk. You can hear that, and it's called chunking in, and it's discouraged.
I bet. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure it'll make more sense once we actually try it.
Oh yeah, when you play
yeah,
it,
yeah.
look at it.
Practice makes perfect when it comes to using these things. So,
Indeed.
yes,
Okay. Thank you.
you bet. Thank you, Elena. Okay, any more? Otherwise, we'll keep motoring on. Okay, Mark. So we're going to talk a little bit now about amateur radio, or what's commonly referred to as ham radio. Mark referred to the different radio services, the family radio service, the GMRS, the MURS, MURS. There's a service called the amateur radio service. It's been around about 120 years in the United States. In fact, some of the earliest radio stations were amateur stations even before the FCC existed. It's a pretty popular hobby, and it's a service that brings a lot of people, electronics, and communications together. It's a little bit, it's not the internet, but before the internet existed, it was a way for people of common interest in various areas to get together. It used to be quite an engineering kind of a hobby, but it's gotten to be much more of a social hobby in many ways now. And many people use it to learn about the world, or to test things and try to, there's contests and so forth. People like we here in Portola Valley, we can talk across town with our UHF and VHF radios that we talked about. But as Mark suggested, you could also talk all around the world on other amateur radio frequencies, all without the internet or cell phones. And just one little personal story, back in 1981, when I moved out here to the Bay Area, the space shuttle was flying over one time, and I went out into my driveway with the appropriate radio, turned it on, and the amateur radio operator on that shuttle flight who was transmitting out was speaking to everybody on the ground. It was really quite cool. So it actually works into space. So it can be a lot of fun, and you can be as involved or as little as you want. Next. So getting an amateur license is really quite easy. The license exams are administered by volunteer examiners. These are people who've been certified by the FCC. There are literally thousands of these people, and they're available online. The test is a blend of amateur radio principles, a little bit about technology. Mostly it's about the rules and regulations and the mission. One thing about amateur radio, it's not commercial service. So you can't transmit music. You don't broadcast. It's about two-way communications. One person talking to another person about a particular subject or trying to accomplish something. So you need to understand that, and they explain all that to you. There are many layers of licenses. The simplest is called a technician. It's 20 questions. People can generally memorize the answers to all the possible questions in an afternoon. There's some great online sources. COVID has really brought a lot of this out. Here's 3 that I found, and I've talked to other hams who just got their license, and they use some of these capabilities. YouTube also has a lot of tremendous videos to teach you the basics about ham radio, and also about how to prepare for the exam. The last one here, ARRL, that's the American Radio Relay League. This is the original amateur radio organization in the United States. They have a whole section on getting your license, getting educating, and training up for it. It really doesn't take long, a couple of hours, a little study, take some of the practice tests, schedule an exam with a volunteer examiner, do this all online in the comfort of your home, and you're done. So, okay, there's a question, just I'll answer it right now. Where can you take the exam? Can you put the link in the chat? Sure, I will put the link in the chat. You can take it online in the present, on a Zoom call in the presence. There has to be a human proctoring the exam. And so you literally set it up and you sit in front of your computer and you take the exam and they grade it on the spot and you can walk away with a license. Okay, I think that's the end of module 1, Mark.
Okay, great. So Ray, have you ever done moon bounce? Have you ever tried that one?
I have not done moon bounce. The guys over at Stanford here at the Dish, they do that quite a bit. And there's in town here, so the amateur radio guys back in the 60s actually put one of the first amateur satellites up, and the fellow that did that lives here in town, and is quite excellent. He's a tremendous resource. We're very lucky to have him nearby, and whenever we have a problem, he's the first call. But there's people like this all over. I'll just, one other little tidbit. When we were going to the moon in 1969, NASA thought they had it all figured out, that nobody on Earth could hear the helmet-to-helmet communication as they walked on the moon. And lo and behold, a challenge like that went out to the amateur radio community, and a bunch of hams in Connecticut, well, they just figured out how to do it. They got the frequencies and the antennas, and they listened to the helmet-to-helmet communications during the Apollo program. It's always fun and challenging. It's a little bit of engineering, a little bit of thrilling, but these days there's all kinds of ham activities and channels. So it's not just about engineering and radio.
Great, awesome. Yeah, it's a really cool hobby to get into, and you get to meet a lot of very fascinating people. So that's part of the fun of it. Okay, so we're 45 minutes in.
Break, Mark. There have been a number of questions in the Q&A channel here. And we've got one outstanding from Bill Behrman that you might want to just answer live. And I don't know if everyone has seen the other questions that came up. You might want to just kind of zip through those two and give 10 seconds on each one of those.
That's a great idea, Chip. Thanks. Yeah. So everybody, take 5, read the Q&As, and we'll start up in five minutes. And I'll sit here and I'll read through and answer any questions if I can here. So Donnie asked, how does ham fit into emergency response? Well, that's a great question. And we're actually going to show an example of that along with some diagrams in the next hour. Because amateur radio operators have a huge amount of capabilities to communicate on lots of different frequencies and technologies, they're often used in emergency response because the radio, when all else fails, amateur radio is available to pass the messages through. So it's a big part of emergency response. And it is something called emergency communications that is a part of amateur radio that you can get involved in if that's something you're interested in. There's all sorts of parts of amateur radio, which is one of the cool things as a hobby, is that it's not just talking on the radio. There's digital modes and moon bounce and talking to the International Space Station and also helping local communities with communication efforts. I know that there's several times that we've had here in the United States where there's been a major disaster and the 911 system went down, and it's amateur radio operators who can pass messages between all the important responders and dispatchers and whatnot. And that happens fairly frequently, even more so on the East Coast where they have hurricanes and other significant disasters. Amateur radio is often used for emergency communications.
This is Ray, I just pile in there. I got interested in it just for that purpose. I grew up in Texas in the Tornado Alley and got my license and learned how to spot tornadoes. So I would drive out to the top of a short hill with my binoculars and my handheld radio and report in when we'd see funnel clouds. That's how I got started. And Well, it kind of stuck.
Yeah, let's see. We've got a question about which local amateur radio groups would you get involved in? Well, here in, we'll talk about the Portola Valley Amateur Radio Club here in the next module, but there's several. Ray, do you have any ones that you particularly like to?
There's a big club in Palo Alto. There's a big club at Foothills, and we have a modest burgeoning club here in Portola Valley with about a dozen folks. We have a Google group that you can sign into and get regular emails. And we can take it offline. I think that was John. Yeah, I'm just Ray at rothrockfamily.com. Send me an email and I can give you some more information there. There's a lot.
We have a question about, is it different from what truckers use on their rigs? Yeah, so truckers use typically CB radio, which is, again, it's a radio service. It's the FCC provides some frequencies that you can use. And CB radios are in, I believe it's the 27 megahertz range, limited to, I think, 4 watts. So they're good for communications on the road, relatively short distance communications. They're still used by the highway patrol and truckers to communicate on the highway. It's just one type of radio service that you can use, but most of what we're talking about here is not CB radio. At one point in time, CB radio was very popular. Now it's pretty much specifically for truckers, highway patrol, other kind of on the road communications.
That's a whole separate service, but it's there. Who else? Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, email, my email.
So Bill, your question regarding frequencies for GMRS and ham. So GMRS is a specific set of frequencies. Ham frequencies is a whole different topic. There are tons and tons of frequencies that amateur radio operators, ham operators can use, which is one of the cool things about it. So with respect to GMRS, I can send you a link to the list of those frequencies. And when it comes to amateur radio or ham radio frequencies, that's a big topic to cover. Yeah, Mario, you asked about GMRS and FRS. Many of the radio, there's GMRS and FRS share frequencies. And so most of the bubble pack radios that you bought before 2017 could communicate on all those frequencies. The ones, again, that are sold now are just FRS and just GMRS, although GMRS does share frequencies with FRS, and so yes, you most of the radios can communicate on those same frequencies. Yeah, Bill, I'll get a link to the GMRS frequencies for you.
I'm posting the amateur frequencies from the ARRL. That's a chart showing you everything. Thanks, Cam, for posting the radio link.
We had a question too about antenna upgrades. And yes, you can get high performance antennas for these handheld UHF radios, but for our purposes, we're talking through a repeater, and so it's not really going to buy you anything. If you're thinking about getting your ham license, these handheld UHF radios also cover the ham frequencies, and so yeah, as a hobby, you might find that rewarding to play around with additional antennas. Someone also asked, Carol asked, Can you store the lithium batteries in the device, or do they leak? They don't leak. However, if you store them in the battery pack, there's a decent chance that you might set them down so that, oh, here we go. There are two little metal contacts here. If you happen to set it down so that these things are both touching a conductor like a coin or something, you're just going to discharge the batteries. So I store the batteries separately and make sure that that the ends aren't touching anything, especially not each other.
Yeah, and the other key thing on these radios is don't leave the battery pack attached in storage, because these radios have a very small power draw on them, a kind of parasitic power draw. So even though it's really small, if you leave the battery attached for 6 months, there's a chance you'll drain the pack. So just leave it disconnected from the radio so it doesn't have any chance to drain.
Now, someone else asked, who wins if multiple people press talk at the same time? Everybody loses. Basically,
that's a really interesting question. That's intermod, and Ray can answer this better than everybody. It's the one with the greatest signal strength will actually be more likely to be heard, but you're going to get this very interesting kind of gibberish sound.
That's exactly right. If you're very close and overwhelmingly powerful, you will dominate. But otherwise, it's going to be kind of sound, and it happens a lot. So just listen before you talk.
Yeah, and it can be hard to, you push the push to talk button and you start talking, and somebody does that at the same exact time, and then you do what's called doubling, where you got two people talking, and then somebody's got to say, oh, he doubled. What was that?
Yeah.
And don't feel bad about it. That's just part of using a radio. It's just part of life. It's like having, in the old days when they had party lines, you'd pick up a telephone and you might have multiple people on the same line. And if multiple people start talking at the same instant, you can't tell what anybody said. So you just kind of develop a rhythm.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, a lot of great questions there. I think we've given everybody a water break. So let's keep going. Let me spin this up.
Another anonymous attendee asked, can you use alkaline AAA batteries in your FRS? Double A's. And yes, you can use the alkaline. They don't have the same storage life. But any AA battery will work.
Yeah.
But just as a reminder, for our purposes, we are going to be using GMRS radios rather than FRS radios.
Yeah. And that question has come up as well, is if you have FRS radios that you've already gotten for your family or your neighborhood use, is that compatible with these CERT radios? No, they are not. You need a GMRS radio, and you need a GMRS radio that is able to talk to a repeater.
That's right. And not all of them are. In fact, most GMRS radios that you purchase from consumer sources do not have the ability to be programmed for repeaters. But the good news is that we've made this real easy for anybody interested in having a radio, and we're going to talk about this here in our next segment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the radio systems used by our program, WPV-CERT. Specifically, the WPV-CERT handheld radio that we've predominantly been talking about so far, and that is using GMRS. We're also going to talk about a WPV-Ready division radio, and we'll talk about how we use amateur radio to communicate between different parties to pass critical messaging. So bear with me while I go over this very complicated diagram. This is a diagram of how we have different communication links between the parties involved here. So at the very top of this diagram, we have the County Office of Emergency Services, or what's called the Area EOC. This is essentially the county resources such as dispatch, Office of Emergency Services, and other key county level personnel who can request resources from the state to federal and all those other important parties. And so when we have to request something, like let's say we need resources for some reason, well then the town emergency operations centers can make those requests to the county. And if regular communication systems are not available, if we don't have cell phones, we don't have internet, we don't have telephones, well, the emergency operations centers do have satellite phones that can be used to contact the county. But there's another way that we contact the county, and that's amateur radio. And we'll talk about that in this module. We'll also talk about how CERT members communicate with the different CERT command posts. Now here in our program, we have 3 branches, the Woodside branch, the Portola Valley branch, and the Skyline branch. And each one of these branches in a major incident would establish their own command post. And then if we look down here, if I'm a CERT member, then I need to be able to communicate with that command post. And I can do that through our handheld GMRS radio and the different repeaters that we've set up. So that's this link here. So if I'm a CERT member and I need to communicate with the command post, then I'm doing that over this handheld radio. This also applies for CERT teams as well, and also CERT team to CERT team members, which we'll talk a little bit more about. We also have ways we can communicate between the branches. So if Woodside CERT branch needs to talk to PV branch, we can do that. Same with the Skyline branch. And we also have methods to communicate with the town EOCs. And we can also communicate directly with the county should we need to do so using amateur radio. So this is a complicated diagram. Don't worry about the specifics, but just understand that we have radio systems set up so that all these different links can be created if we lose regular communication. So we can do all this through radio systems that we have in place. So let me just give you a quick example of this. So let's say that this CERT member comes across a serious incident. We'll call it a house fire. They try to call 911, but there's no phone service. Well, what can they do? They can use their handheld radio to communicate that message or incident to the command post. The command post then processes that, prioritizes it, and says, okay, this is a high priority incident. We need to get this passed on. Now, if the Woodside Emergency Operations Center was active at this time, then we would pass that message to the Woodside EOC, who would then pass it up to county, and county dispatch can then dispatch out fire service in this case. If the Woodside EOC was not operational at the time, the CERT branch can communicate that message directly using amateur radio straight to the county, at which point the county can then dispatch fire services. So that's how this information kind of flows through this, and we're going to give you some examples of how this works here shortly. So the WPV-CERT handheld radios, the one that we just are talking about, they're meant for CERT members to communicate with the CERT command posts. And they're also for inter-team communications, or what we call tactical channels. Tactical channels are simplex channels that we use to talk radio to radio. These are also useful for staying up to date on any changes that might happen to command post locations. So if, for example, we assume that our staging location for Portola Valley is the Portola Valley Town Center, but if that's damaged or inaccessible, then we would communicate those changes over these radios so that CERT members know where to go. And then it's also useful because you can stay in touch with other CERT members when regular communications fail, not necessarily some disaster, but like the public safety power shutoffs. When last year we had several days worth of power outages, and in this case, you could use this radio system to stay in touch with other CERT members and make sure everybody's okay and request help if you needed. So we're going to just show a little demo of how this works. All right, so we just had a major earthquake, and I went and checked on my family, checked on the house, everything's okay. I grabbed my CERT backpack, and I'm gonna go ahead and get my radio out and get it turned on. So here's my radio, and here's a lithium battery pack, which I'll go ahead and connect to the radio. I leave that disconnected so it doesn't drain when it's in storage. I'll go ahead and turn on the radio and make sure I'm on the CERT repeater channel. And also I carry with me a spare battery, and this one is a AA pack. So if I ever need to have a fresh battery pack and I'm not able to charge the lithium, I can just use regular AA batteries, or in this case, the lithium non-rechargeable AA batteries are great for long-term storage. So I'm gonna go ahead and head down to the staging area right now.
Attention WPV-CERT members, the mounted patrol grounds have been badly damaged. The new Woodside branch staging location will be at the Woodside Village Church, across from Woodside Elementary. Portola Valley branch staging location is the town center in Portola Valley.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you can help, but there's a house on fire down the street. We tried calling 911, but the phones are down.
Okay, I can try to send a message to the command post and they can get it relayed on. What was the address you said?
It's near the intersection of Jones and Maple, and it's beginning to spread fast.
Jones and Maple. Okay, thank you. Command post, team 1.
Team 1, go ahead.
Yes, I have a report of a rapidly spreading house fire at the intersection of Jones and Maple.
Command post copies. Spreading house fire at the intersection of Jones and Maple.
Okay, so as we just saw in that little video, having a two-way radio can be a very valuable tool when we lose our regular communication methods like cellular phones, landlines, internet access, and text messaging. Ideally, we'd like to have all of our CERT members have a radio, and we've made it very easy to purchase one. If you go to our website, WPV-CERT.org, there is a link to purchase a radio that's been pre-programmed, and you do not need to be an amateur radio operator. There's no tests that you have to take. You just purchase the radio and purchase a license through the FCC, and then you can use the radio. And we're going to be offering training videos on YouTube so that you can understand how to use the radio and practice using the radio, as well as offering monthly nets, which is an opportunity to talk to other CERT members over the radio and practice using the radio. Another important reason why you might want to have a radio is if in the upcoming power safety shutoffs, I know that the fire district in many areas, people lost all communication in that outage, and having this two-way radio would enable you to communicate with other CERT members and pass important messages should that be necessary. So thanks very much for watching. Okay, hopefully that was not too hard to understand the audio on that, but that's just a little example of how you could use one of our radios. And as I mentioned there in the video, we do have a YouTube training video which talks in detail about how to set up your radio and how to use it. That's currently up and available now. We do have weekly practice sessions. I said in that video monthly, but we're doing it actually weekly. And those are Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. It's very informal. It's just simply a way for you to test or practice using the radio and talk to other CERT members. And it is available now to purchase. You can go to our website, wpv-cert.org/buy. And the license is the GMRS license, again, at $70 for 10 years, and it covers you and your family. Little quick note, this is a radio for the Woodside Fire Protection District or WPV-CERT program. So this would not be an appropriate radio for you to purchase if you're in some other CERT program, because this radio is programmed specifically for our frequencies and channels. So which channels do you actually want to use? So if you have one of our radios, then we've programmed it with a whole bunch of specific channels for our program. And the two most important ones is the WD1 channel, which is channel 1. That's a repeater, a GMRS repeater located in Woodside. And the Portola Valley PV1 channel, channel 3. That's a repeater located in Portola Valley. There's also the PV2 channel, which is an additional repeater in Portola Valley. And then if you're part of the Skyline branch, currently we do not have a repeater up on Skyline. It is something we'll probably have in the future, but for now, the PV1 channel should give you pretty good coverage. So just use PV1 for now, channel 3. We talked about tactical channels, simplex tactical channels. These are just, again, radio to radio channels, so they do not use a repeater. Now, if you're in a CERT team, and let's say your team is searching a building, and you have 2 members in the building searching, and you have 1 team member outside for safety, you all 3 have radios, well then you can use a tactical channel to stay in touch, and you could use any one of these 6 tactical channels, CTAC 1 through 6, and those are channels 11 through 16 on our radios. Now, these are actually special frequencies that are part of the public safety pool that we talked about earlier in this webinar. We have an agreement with the Red Cross to be able to use these frequencies. So these are not frequencies that anybody can use, but for WPV-CERT purposes, we are able to use these frequencies. Again, those are for radio to radio communications, so you can stay in touch intra-team member or anytime that you need a tactical channel to communicate for whatever purpose that might be. Like, for example, you're part of the logistics team, and all of the logistics folks decide that they're going to be on CTAC 6. Well, then you can stay in touch with all your logistics people. Maybe all the MedOps people are going to be on CTAC 5. So that's the tactical channel that medical ops folks are going to use to communicate. And then if somebody needs to talk to logistics, they know that they're on CTAC 6. So you can tune over to CTAC 6 and say, hey, this is MedOps, I need blah, blah, blah. So that's how that can work in a real scenario. Okay, any questions on the WPV-CERT handheld radio? Okay, so we got several questions. Dave has his hand raised, so let's go to Dave. You can unmute, Dave.
Thanks, Mark. You just talked about those tactical channels. As you know, some of us in divisions use those tactical channels for our initial response and communication inside the divisions. How will conflicts be resolved there? Will we continue to have access to that? And how do we get CERT members who are coming in to give us free access to those channels? Over.
Sure, yes, they are shared frequencies. So in almost all of these radio services, these frequencies are shared, and people have to be diligent not to cause interference to other users. In this case, the tactical channels, CTAC 1 through 6, are the same frequencies that the divisions have used for their handheld radios. There's not that many divisions that have been using those, so I don't expect any interference in that case. If that was to occur, then we would simply move to other tactical frequencies. So it's very common for tactical frequencies to be used by multiple users. It's just ultimately we have to share the frequencies.
Thank you. Another question. In slide 31, you showed ready divisions communicating up the line to CERT command posts. For those divisions that are not within towns of Portola Valley or Woodside, we communicate directly to the county OES with our needs. Is that understood by all of the non-town divisions?
Yes, we're very much aware that divisions can contact directly the county. Can you clarify exactly what your question is with respect to other divisions?
Well, the other divisions, meaning the non-town divisions. The town has no legal responsibility for us, so we would therefore communicate, but the county does. So we would want to communicate directly. I just want folks in the non-town divisions to understand that your slide 31 showed the typical division reporting to Woodside or Portola Valley. But in the case of non-town divisions, they report directly to the county.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And we could make some changes to the diagram so that's more clear.
Thanks.
Okay. Vic, you have your hand raised. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Are you talking to me or Vic Schachter?
Vic Shafter. Sorry, Vicky. Okay. So Vic Shafter, if you want to ask a question, you go ahead. Okay. So just looking at the questions here in the chat room, if we go out of town, can we leave these radios for other people in the neighborhood to use in case of an emergency? Our CERT radios, we need our CERT members to have training on these radios and understand their use along with the licensing requirements. So this would not be something that you would just hand to somebody without any training. Okay, and we have a question regarding our division radios provided to division leaders. So the answer to that is yes. If you're a division leader, then you can have a division radio. And if you don't have one, we will get you one. How long does it take to get the CERT radio after placing the order? So we buy them in batches. And so it depends on exactly when the order is placed. It can take a couple of weeks or a month. We just got a big batch in, so as of right now, we're fulfilling the orders, so they're coming in very quickly.
I want to point out to people too that if you're calling for assistance, for any kind of support, calling the county, even if you're not a town division, calling the county is probably not going to do you any good. They can't reach you. And so you would still want to try and contact your nearest CERT command post. They're much more likely to be able to get some resources out to you long before the county could, or the town for that matter.
Okay, go ahead and move on here. Thank you for those questions. Pass it over here to Chip to talk more about the division radios.
All right, so we do have one radio per division allocated. They're not all handed out. They're usually kept at the Division Operations Center, the DOC, or at one of the division leaders' homes, or some other designated manager of that radio, as long as we know where it is, and the local people know how to use it. It's considered an active live resource and a good thing to have in your area. They are pre-programmed with 3 channels. These are VHF low band, so they are very good at traveling long distance. They're not very good at penetrating through walls. UHF is much better at that kind of thing. Your handheld radio is much better at that kind of a thing, but they don't go very far. These VHF low band radios are very good at going long distance, and they come with an external radio mount, antenna mount. So they operate at much higher much higher power as well. So you get a really good signal all over the district with those things. It does require external power. It can be operated from a number of sources, but any good 12-volt power source will operate it. There are a number of 12-volt sources available if you care to run one from inside your home. If you have power, run it from a generator and so forth. There are converters that will do that, or you can we hand them out with cigarette lighter converters. So you can just plug this into the cigarette lighter on your car. And in fact, that's really the easiest way to do it. And it uses a magnetic mount on the top of your car. 50 to 70 watts. So this is 10 times or more power than you're getting out of the UHF handhelds. So of course you're going to get a lot longer distance response there. I'm going to show you a video, I think. Yes, so let me try to share my screen and show you a video now.
This is the VHF low band, or commonly called the division radio, that was used by our program for such a long time and is still very useful today. And the components to this are the body of the radio itself with the power cord and the microphone with the push to talk button on the side. The antenna mount, that's a magnetic mount, and that is the antenna itself there, which you're going to see me attach in just a moment. And I'm going to put these things together, and then I'm going to show you what they look like out mounted on the top of my car. And I just want to point out a couple of the features here that we have on the front. This here is the on, off, and volume. This down here is where the microphone attaches. Over here you can see the channel selector, and this light tells you what channel it's on. As you can see, it's not a very big unit. Here on the back we have the antenna attachment and the power attachment, where I have detached the cigarette lighter connector that was on it before. And next we're going to just go outside and hook this up to the car and turn it on and see how it works. And so now I'm going to set this up in the car. This is the radio, and first I'm going to attach to it the long cord that will connect to the cigarette lighter. Then, whoops, I'm going to take this nice long antenna here and attach it to this base. This is a magnet, and it just screws on there very easily. I want to make it nice and firm, not super tight. And it needs to go about in the middle of a 3 foot by 3 foot minimum metal roof. It can go on the hood if for some reason you have a, let's say, a glass moon roof or T-top or something like that, and you don't have enough. What this does is it acts as a mirror for radio waves. Now the other end here is a very simple screw-in connection. And I already showed you the back of this radio, and it just goes in there. You have to kind of push it in. It'll be a little resistance, but you push it in just snugly and then screw it down till it's nice and tight. And you see you've actually got a long lead there on the antenna. Gives you plenty of room. The microphone is the last thing we plug in. And it plugs right in. It's got a jack just like your telephone or a network connector. Clicks right in. And again, this is your push to talk on here. I call it push pause talk, because if you don't pause for a half second or so before you begin to talk, it may not pick up the beginning of what you say. So always remember to pause a little bit before you talk. Make sure it's turned off. Click to make sure that's off. And then it's a simple matter to plug this into the cigarette lighter in your car. I won't try to show you what that looks like here. If you don't have a cigarette lighter, you may have to get some sort of a permanently wired into your fuse box connection. Very easy to do. We can help you get that done, or any mechanic can do that for you. And then, of course, you want to turn the car on and test your radio. So, we have our connection to the microphone. The speaker is built in here to the radio. We have our connections in the back for the antenna. Everything's connected well there. And to the power. So, when I turn the knob, the lights come on, and it says 2, which means that right now we are on channel 2, which is the Portola Valley channel. And I can begin to transmit very simply by pushing, pausing, and then talking. Hello, this is Chip Swan on the Portola Valley VHF low radio. And there's nobody else on right now, so nobody's going to answer.
And I think that is the end of that part. And Mark, I believe you're center stage again.
Questions about that for Chip?
Yeah. So I see a question from Nan saying, thanks, how about the radio itself? Let's see, was that a follow-on to some other question? Did I miss that? Can an existing 2-meter amateur radio be programmed with the CERT channels? Mark, I'm going to defer that one to you. I'm not sure what the licensing is. They're just GMR. No.
I responded to one of those questions. You do need a GMRS license to transmit on GMRS frequencies. So having an amateur license does not in itself give you authority to transmit on GMRS. You do need to still get that license for your family.
Yes, but also then there's the question of, can we use those 6 tactical channels without a ham license? And the answer is yes. Those Red Cross frequencies are available to us. There was a question about that for some time, and quite frankly, I have not been able to find the documentation that says we can do it, but there is no documentation that says we cannot do it, and nobody has ever raised a beef about it. So I believe we can program a radio to those frequencies and use those tactical channels.
As long as the radio is a FCC Part 90 certified radio. That's the only requirement with respect to the physical radio. So an amateur radio would not, you wouldn't be able to program the Red Cross tactical frequencies on radios that are not FCC Part 90 certified. So that's a very technical caveat, and I'm happy to deal with that if anybody has those questions.
Does one need a ham license for those frequencies, et cetera? They're not commercial bands. Those tactical channels, no, they're not commercial bands. You do need an approved piece of hardware, but that's beyond that. You don't need a special license. You don't need a ham license.
The tactical channels are Red Cross, just like the VHF low, and it's through an MOU that we use them on a shared basis. So if you've got the right equipment, they can be used for emergency purposes.
So Robert asked about the 730 radio checks. Yeah, so we listen and monitor both the WD1 and PV1 channels. So so yeah, listen to both, and we'll be talking on both. Okay.
All right.
On to you, Ray.
Okay, I think we're in the last lap here, folks. So thank you for bearing with us. We're still hanging strong at 49 people. That's just tremendous. Thank you for your interest and your attention. So the last little bit here is about our communication to the San Mateo County. This is a piece of the diagram from before. Our county, San Mateo County, and most all counties have these sorts of systems. Anyway, our Office of Emergency Services or Emergency Services, it actually goes all the way up to Sacramento, but ours is called San Mateo County OES, and it's referred to in an emergency situation or when it's officially on the air as Area EOC. For example, the county Area EOC was operational during the fire issues that we had in San Mateo County. They operated 7x24. There was someone on the air all the time, and they would put out public information. People could call in and report various things, and they would coordinate resources. So it's a proper, well-trained, lots of people involved organization, and it's managed by the sheriff's office. We have, in an emergency, if all the things in Mark's first slide, if everything goes down, phones, internet, what have you, and the ham radios are about our last resort, that is our direct channel to the San Mateo OES. And we do that through a specific frequency, a specific repeater. They operate a VHF repeater for ham radio operators all over the county, North County, South County, out to the coast. It's all hooked together. We actually have a branch of that here in Portola Valley. So if our town center at Woodside or Portola Valley is operational, there's a ham radio down there. They can talk locally amongst the town that's in, but it also has a channel to talk up to the county area EOC. Likewise, these branch command posts have a ham radio if the town hasn't opened up EOC for whatever reason. So, and then the hams in town. Every ham out there should have these frequencies, and they're available on our PV-ARC website and also at the San Mateo OES website. These frequencies should be programmed into your radio, and we'll come up with a schedule, but they operate every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, so people can get on. It takes about 15 minutes to see if everything's working. But anyway, that's our final and last communication link over to San Mateo. Obviously, they're going to be very busy. San Mateo is a very large county with a lot of people. I think there are 29 towns in it. So it's going to be a very busy place. So we would only communicate up if we really had the need or didn't have some special resources here in our towns. Next slide. So just to demonstrate this really quickly, Jerry Shefford and I put together a little quick demo of what a communication might sound like. You'll hear us using our ham radio call signs. Jerry is local here in Portola Valley, and I am pretending to be up at area EOC at the San Mateo County Operations Center, which is down in Redwood City. So Mark, you want to roll it?
Area EOC, this is Portola Valley EOC KN6IHN, over.
Roger, Portola Valley EOC, this is area EOC WP5NVN. Go ahead, what's your traffic?
Need emergency transport.
Roger that, standby 1. Hey, Portola Valley, what's the nature of the injury, over?
We have an elderly female with a compound fracture of the right leg. Over.
Copy, elderly female, compound fracture. What's the location, over?
50 Valencia Court, Portola Valley.
That, I copy 50 Valencia Court, Portola Valley. Very good. Portola Valley, this is area EOC, San Mateo County. We'll get back to you with estimated time of arrival, over.
KN6IHN, over.
So in there's a couple of things worth noting. We established who we were without getting into a bunch of extraneous conversation. Then Jerry stated what he needed without a lot of detail. So it immediately frames up what the situation is up at area EOC, so it can be actually, in some cases, if they're getting inundated, they can triage very quickly on the spot. If it doesn't sound like it's a life or death situation, they can postpone following up with you. And then Jerry gave me what the situation was, and then I repeated it back to him, and then he gave me the location when I asked him for it. So short, distinct messages where there was a message acknowledgement. It's a very typical, effective way to communicate on the radio. That was over the repeater here in town, and things were working pretty well at the time. So that's just a very classic example. Go down there next, Mark. I'm just looking here. Someone, Cam wrote here, remember, to err is to human, to foul up requires technology. That is so true. Go on to the next slide here, Mark. I'm watching the questions. So in an emergency, everybody's doing the best they can, and information is being passed up the line, is also being passed east and west, meaning laterally to local resources. Everybody should be prepared to do the best they can to take care of themselves and their neighbors. But in the event we need external resources, we have to document it. And the documentation is very important. One, if you get called away or something happens to you in the middle of your time on the radio, someone can come in and it's a standard form and they can read what has happened. So if they're waiting for a return call from area EOC, they can find it and check it off. Second, this documentation helps the towns, quite specifically all of us, get reimbursed by the federal government. There's this whole incident command system in the Department of Homeland Security where if you document it, you can get compensated for things. So, and it also allows us after an event to go through and read the log. What happened? What worked? What didn't work? How could we improve this? So I know it sounds like a lot of red tape, but it's actually very effective. I mean, people scribble, I scribble, but man, it's just so important to keep that information down on paper so that when you're not the Portola Valley EOC or you're not the Team 1 leader, you can hand it off and keep the project going. It's just really important to do this. Okay, keep moving here. So back a few years ago, the town of Portola Valley got a grant and purchased an AM broadcast radio station. It broadcast on frequency 1680 on the AM dial. Most cars, except Teslas, have AM radios. And AM radios are cheap. You can get one if you don't have it. It operates pretty effectively all the way up to Los Trocos. We can actually hear it way north of Woodside, across 280 up into the Emerald Hills area. The message is maintained by Portola Valley Town Management. It doesn't change unless it's need to change. Right now, there's just a routine message about how to prepare for an emergency. But for example, during the fires or during the PSPS times, the message was changing often. And it's got internet service and backup power so that if all that's operational, the messages can be changed. It also, by the way, you can go to the radio on site and it's got a microphone on it so you could transmit live. So it's a resource, an information resource. It's not a substitute for dialing into the San Mateo emergency radio systems on AM or FM or any of those other things. As Mark said in the very beginning of this talk, having information is very important, and AM broadcast or FM broadcast radio are great ways to get it. Next. So we've had a lot of questions. A few years ago, some of the hams here in town started a little Portola Valley Amateur Radio Club. I noticed on the chat, someone mentioned the Palo Alto Club, fantastic club, lots of resources, lots of capability. Ours is a no dues, open to all. You don't even have to be a ham radio operator. We have a little Google I/O group that we maintain. I don't know, there's probably 15 or 16 names on there. Send me your call sign, or not your, send me your name and I'll put you on it. We do maintain 2 amateur radio repeaters in town, and we also maintain the GMRS repeaters for WPV-CERT for Portola Valley. And Mark and I work on all of it, actually. All of us work on it, but we help out there. And we do have just one little page website, radio.rothrockfamily.com, with a bunch of frequencies for hams. You'll understand all the lingo on there, but it does have links to other resources, particularly the San Mateo Office of Emergency Services resources. So it's a nice little thing to have saved in your browser. Next. As been mentioned a couple of times here, Tuesday seems to be the day that all these radio networks turn on and operate just for a short test. As Mark mentioned, the WPV-CERT radio practice is at 7:30. It's on both channels WD1 and PV1 on the CERT radio channels. These are GMRS repeaters. So you really do need to get that GMRS license to operate on these things, but people are listening. I'll be listening sometimes. Mark's listening sometimes, Chip, many others. Then at 7:45 on the local ham repeater, we get on for 5 or 10 minutes. Usually there's a half a dozen of us. It just lets us reconnect. It's been kind of useful in this time of COVID. We share news. We share if there's any changes going on in the ham radio world. And then at 8 o'clock, we all switch our channel over to the San Mateo Sheriff's ACS net. That is the Office of Emergency Services for San Mateo. It operates for about 20 minutes. It's a directed net operated from wherever the operator, the net control person is, which could be anywhere in the county. And it operates the entire county over the coast, South County, North County. It's quite sophisticated, quite an elaborate network. Notice that we highlighted the times in red there. You do need to be a ham radio operator in order to transmit to either amateur repeater, but you're most welcome to listen, and we would encourage you to do that. You'll get a sense of who's on and what we talk about, what's interesting or not interesting. So again, Tuesday nights starting at about 7:30, it's all done in about an hour, maybe even 45 minutes. And that, my friends and fellow Portola Valleyans, Woodsideians, and unincorporatians, is our session. And I thank you all for your time on this. And my email's on the chat. Again, ray@rothrockfamily.com. Willing to help out anybody, antennas, radios, information. I'm sure that's true for anybody, all the hosts on here and many of the other people in WPV-CERT. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody. We will stay on here for a little while to answer any questions. I see there's a couple, so at least for the next 10, 15 minutes, 4:45. So we have an anonymous question regarding how how will
Take down the video. Take down the. They want to see your face, Mark.
Oh, I don't want to. All right, let's take it down.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks everybody for the little technical glitch there. So Vista Verde, Los Trancos, actually I'm gonna unremove my spotlight. Okay. So I'm going to answer Roger Katz's question really quickly because this is an easy one. What is the process for ordering radios? If you want to purchase our WPV-CERT radio, just go to our website, wpv-cert.org/buy. And you can order it right from there. We do have them in stock, so they'll be shipping or delivered within the next week or two. So thank you for that. And the question regarding how will Vista Verde and Los Trancos Woods communicate with the Woodside Fire District if we have a fire during an earthquake? So we have to talk about the different scenarios here. If Vista Verde and Los Trancos has amateur radio operators within their area, then the way you would communicate that is through amateur radio to area EOC, as Ray was just describing, because that's your direct link to the county, and the county operates the dispatch for our fire and police services. So the most efficient and effective way to get help in that case would be to send it through amateur radio to area EOC. Of course, if you do have regular communications, you would use 911, you'd call it in directly. The other way of doing it is you could use the division radio system to communicate with the Portola Valley EOC, or even if Portola Valley EOC wasn't necessarily online, you could communicate that if you had our WPV-CERT handheld radios. You could try to communicate that to our our Portola Valley branch command post, who could then use amateur radio to communicate it up the chain. So several ways of doing it, but just know your direct method would always be 911 first if that's working, and then as a backup you'd be using amateur radio to contact the county through that. So I can get a ham radio and listen and learn, but no transmission Intel license. Yes, that is absolutely correct. You can always listen. You only need the license to transmit. So we have programmed our WPV-CERT handheld radios to several of the most commonly used local amateur radio repeaters and other frequencies. And so if you do purchase our radio, then you can absolutely tune into those channels and listen. Just don't transmit until you have your license. Ray, there's a question from Rachel
Warner. When you get started, it's one of the links you shared. Yes, the ARRL.org link is probably the best way to get some general information about radio. If you already have your license, then you can just go to radio.rothrock.family or rothrockfamily.com to get local information for the repeaters. Just send me an email, and I'll forward some information, which I keep handy. Great, Rachel. Send me your call sign. I'll put you on the email chain as well.
Hi, just a general question that we talked about the radio being for CERT members. Does that mean that only people that have completed the CERT course or people that are officially CERT members can buy the radio, or is it available to anybody who wants to buy it?
It's available to anybody that has started or finished the CERT course. So we're playing a little bit loose on this, but if you've taken some of the CERT classes, then you go ahead and buy the radio. Of course, we'd like you to finish completing your CERT course, but yeah.
Got a couple into the Q&A channel there, Mark.
Yeah, well, the slides be emailed to attendees. We will post them on our website, and then we will send out an email to anybody that was registered on the Eventbrite page. We'll make sure to send you an email that with the link to those. But if you didn't register on Eventbrite and you still want to get the slides, just know that they will be posted to our WPV-CERT.org website in the next day or two. So Dennis has a question regarding FRS frequencies and our radio, the KG-UV7D. So the answer to that is no, you cannot transmit on FRS frequencies unless it is an FRS type certified radio. And the only FRS type certified radios are the ones that, are the inexpensive bubble pack radios with the fixed antennas. They don't want you transmitting specifically on those frequencies with higher power, more capable radios. And they do that on purpose because they want to keep the FRS frequencies kind of crippled, to be frank, so that the family talking at Disneyland on one side of the park, or isn't interfering with the family talking at the water park a mile and a half away. So essentially FRS is meant for very local communications, and they purposely cripple and limit the radios so that they're not more capable. Okay, we still have several dozen people in here, so please, this is a great time to ask any questions you can think about. We'll do our best to either answer it or we will get back to you. I think it's probably worth mentioning that these radio services define the frequencies, who can use them, if there's a license requirement, and other details. And radios themselves, most of the new radios that are being sold on the market, can actually be programmed to pretty much any of the frequencies. So just because you can program a frequency into a radio doesn't mean that you can legally transmit with that radio, either because the radio isn't certified to transmit on that frequency, or you need a license, or other reasons. So some of these questions can get kind of in depth, and there's some gray areas on some of this. So we got a question.
But that's a very good comment, Mark, because not all radios are the same, and the FCC wants to certify them so they don't cause interference to other services. So it's very important to play by the rules. Otherwise, it just becomes messy and nothing can work. So, Bob, just saw this. I just ordered the radio. How do I get the license? You go to the fcc.gov. And it's part, I think there's a link on our site, but it's a form 605, I think it is, 610, and you can type in the search GMRS license. It'll take you right there. You fill it in, put your credit card, and literally within days or almost immediately, you get an email back with the license.
Yeah, and Bob, I just posted a link to our CERT website where we do have links to those forms, as well as a link to a page that has a very good description of the process, because some of those forms on the FCC site can be kind of buried. So there's some help for you on the page I just posted. Okay, so this question regarding, is there one quality radio recommendation that can do GMRS, MURS, and ham, provided that the user has the respective licenses for both GMRS and ham? Yeah, so this is a good question. The answer is that a Part 90 certified radio, like the one that Ray is showing there, actually the radio we sell is a Part 90 certified radio. You can use that radio on GMRS and ham frequencies, but you cannot use it on MURS frequencies, because MURS specifically requires that the device be certified for MURS use. And the only way that it'll be certified is if it only does MURS. And this goes back to what Ray just said, and that's that the FCC is trying to allocate these frequencies and services to different users and try to prevent people from interfering with each other and whatnot. And so they kind of create these artificial boundaries to try to slot people into the different roles. But so if you're looking for the biggest, baddest, end all, it does it everything radio, honestly, the best option is a Part 90 certified radio, because it can be used on any of the amateur frequencies, any of the business industrial frequencies, any of the public safety frequencies. It just can't be used on MURS, and it can't be used on FRS.
By the way, using a non-certified device to talk on a MURS frequency is exactly the kind of a thing that if you're caught at that, they'll write you a $10,000 ticket.
Let's see here. So we have a question regarding a specific radio model. Motorola T480 FRS GMRS. So that sounds to me like a bubble pack radio, probably sold prior to September 2017. So it's both FRS and GMRS. Yeah, it's a talk about. So this is a radio you can use for very local neighborhood communications. You can use it to talk to other FRS radios. You can use it on some of the GMRS frequencies, not the repeater frequencies. So the answer is that if you want to talk on our repeaters, then that radio is not going to work. It's not a repeater capable radio. Let's see, Elena is asking regarding the form that combines GMRS with ship, aircraft, and amateur radio. I haven't seen the form in a while, so maybe somebody else knows the answer to that.
Yeah, I haven't looked either. It may be the same form for the different services. In fact, I think you have to specify, and they have this odd coding system, like GMRS is like ZM or something, and amateur is MS or something. I don't know. There's a little on the web FCC side.
Yeah, so Elena, I would point you to the link that I posted in the chat, because it does have a step-by-step instructions on how to get the GMRS license.
Great.
It's also, if you don't want to look at the link, it's also our website. You click on the Learn, and then Resources, and then Radios. Okay. Then you're good. Fill the form out. Let's see.
Yeah. Bob, it may be 610. I can't remember. It's been a few years since I submitted my renewal. Bob says he can't find 605. I could be wrong.
I found 605. I just went on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Post the link. Grab it and post the link if you would.
Okay.
It's already on the chat.
Oh, fantastic.
Cam put it on.
Of course. Cam reads our minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we still got 24 people here. You're sticking around because you have questions. Give us more questions just for 5 more minutes, and then it's 5 o'clock. So we're final opportunity.
Elena does ask, is there a radio service code specific to us? Elena, could you unmute yourself? And I want to ask you, like, are we GMRS, or is there a call sign specific to us? What exactly is your question?
I think she's referring to the GMRS code on the form.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. The first question on the FCC 605 main form is radio service code. And I'm not seeing where to find that.
That's a great question.
So if that's not something that sounds familiar, I'll keep looking. Oh, I see where it is. Okay, never mind. It's ZA is the answer to that.
Okay.
Okay, never mind. Sorry.
This is a government form.
Yeah, I see. I'm gonna have to print it all out to find it rather than scrolling back and forth. Okay, no, this is going to be a fun little exercise. Thank you for your help.
Yeah, you bet.
Say, Chip, are you going to have the radios as well as the kit, first aid kits?
I do not.
Okay.
That's being handled by Mark, and Kim Lathan is actually doing a lot of the delivery and handout on those.
Gotcha.
So John, you passed online CERT training. Can I buy the radio? Yeah, so please feel free to buy the radio, even if you haven't taken the hands-on portion of it yet. We're just looking for some level of commitment to the CERT program so that people understand, how these systems are used and when to use them and what the rules are. So absolutely, you can certainly buy one. And there was also some questions regarding programming the CTAC or Red Cross frequencies on radios. And we can do that as long as the radio is a Part 90 certified radio, and that the people who are going to be using the radio understand that that is through a MOU or memorandum of understanding with the Red Cross for the purposes of emergency communication. So it's not something that just because we can program it on your radio, you can go and use it to talk to your family at Disneyland. It's specifically meant for our program and for training and emergency response purposes. So that's why I'm a little hesitant when people ask me that question, because I have to ask several follow-up questions just to make sure they're just not looking for, free frequencies to program on the radio.
Yeah. And those are on loan from Red Cross. So be aware that if Red Cross needs those frequencies at any time, they can get on and say, hey, you guys shut it down, and we have to stop using them. So, I would rely more heavily on a good GMRS radio myself. That's what I use locally in our division.
Okay, everybody. Well, it's 5:05. Thanks for spending the last couple hours with us. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to send us any questions. Our website, we're posting a lot of additional material on there, so always check that out. We will have a formal communications plan document posted up there pretty soon that details all the stuff we mentioned here today. But for simplicity reasons, the best thing to do is, if you want to communicate with the CERT team, is just buy the CERT radio. It's already programmed and you don't need to worry about any of the details. And it's also a radio that if you do choose to get into amateur, you can use that radio. So you don't need to buy two radios. You can actually use the same radio. You just have to buy like a $6 programming cable. So
good.
Great. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Thanks for coming, folks.
Take care.